after this member made his threats of leaving and reporting Shoko to the police, Shoko decided that in order to keep everything under wraps, that this person had to also disappear. He forced other members to strangle the member who threatened to blow the whistle, and they also cremated and flushed away his body. This second death was not an accident. This second death marked the commencement of a series of cold-blooded murder that was about to take place in this cult. Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing a doomsday cult. Now, when this cult began initially, people saw it as something that was innocent. They saw it as like a peaceful religion, a peaceful community, and they weren't really seen as a threat necessarily initially. However, as time went on and people, I guess, like started to almost ridicule the leader or wasn't taking him seriously with certain things, his ego just completely took over, with his end goal being to eradicate the earth of people who he didn't seem as worthy enough to become enlightened. So let's go ahead and get into it. Shoko Asahara was born on March 2nd, 1955. He was born with infantile glaucoma, which left him blind in one of his eyes. His parents ended up sending him off to boarding school for the blind, and at this boarding school, the students would say that because he still had vision in one of his eyes, he would get special treatment. He was treated like a king. He would force other students to do his assignments for him, which honestly didn't take that much convincing because of how special he was treated. But the weird thing was, he would force other students to fight each other for his amusement. So off rip, this guy's weird. Like, he's weird. It's not starting off well. Now, fast forward to the early 80s, he ended up opening his own pharmacy where he earned 7 million yen, which is about $30,000 US. But the thing was, he earned most of this money, if not all of it, in false claims to insurance companies for fake prescriptions. Eventually, he was found out, his pharmacy got shut down, but after that, he ended up making his own concoction of drugs where he would claim to people that it could cure things like rheumatism, neuralgia, and back pain in 30 minutes or less. He would make tons and tons of money off of this scheme, and he would have these sittings, these meetings talking about his drugs in these fancy, luxurious hotels, and he would be making at least $1,000 per sitting. He was eventually arrested and fined for selling fake prescriptions without a pharmaceutical license. And I'm not sure how long he spent in prison, because by the time he got out, it was still the early 80s. It was 1984 when he founded this small yoga group called Om Shinzen Nokai, which meant the gathering of Om divine immortals. Now, since the beginning of, I guess, this yoga group that he founded, he would claim to his followers, his subscribers, whatever you want to call them, he would claim to them that he knew that the world was going to end by some type of nuclear war. And only a few enlightened individuals would survive. And he had the answer to how you can become enlightened and how you can ultimately survive the end of the world. He later renamed this yoga group Shinrikyo, which meant supreme truth. And then he changed his name to Shoko Asahara. So he was not born with that name originally. He was born as Chizuo Matsumoto. And at this point, this is where he became a self-proclaimed messiah. He claimed he was the reincarnation of Buddha. And this is when the cult really started to come into the works. This is when the cult really started to develop, after he started making these claims. And this cult was based on the teachings of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. And Shoko also offered liberation and enlightenment as the ultimate goal of living. He really became introduced to the public from this image. And when the public first saw it, they were convinced without a doubt that Shoko could levitate, because because that's what he was claiming. And they saw him as some type of omniscient, godlike figure. However, this Takimoto guy came out and released this image where he was imitating exactly what Shoko did. And he was like, okay, if Shoko can levitate, then that means so can I. When this image became public and people saw it, it really started to put doubts in the minds of not only the public, you know, the people who were not involved in the cult, but also the people who were in the cult. And that's the last thing that Shoko would want. That's the last thing that any cult leader would want, is to have doubt in anybody's mind. And for Shoko specifically, this is something that he took very seriously. He did not want to be doubted. He did not want to be ridiculed. And he made that loud and clear. So like I mentioned earlier, the beginning of the cult was seen as very harmless, innocent, and that's how Shoko would present the group. I mean, even in the media, they created their own type of like cartoon style commercials, I guess, in a sense, where they would kind of mimic the popular animes at the time. And it was seen as harmless media. It didn't seem as something that was like brainwashing or that they were trying to entice you to join in any way. It just seemed like they were kind of, you know, showing what they were about, but that was really it. And initially, most of the public saw him as a harmless, intriguing religious figure. However, there were some people who saw him as manipulative and as some type of con man. But his followers would describe him as charming, optimistic, warm, and a part of a long tradition of religious leaders. Specifically, one member of would say that the reason why he joined the cult was because as a child, he always wondered, what is the purpose of humans? What is the purpose of life here on Earth? And he said that Shoko sold him on the fact that could provide the answer for that for him. So he was very intrigued by that. And one of Shoko's teachings was that living in a materialistic world would put you as a person at risk for developing a lot of bad karma. And the worse your karma was, the worse your rebirth would be, and the longer you would spend in hell after you died, before you were reincarnated. And this was also during a time when Japan's economy was flourishing. They were the envy of the world in terms of how well they were doing. So society was very materialistic at this time. So it was very prevalent for him to be discussing the fact that you should not be living so materialistically. And as time went on and things continued to happen, Shoko's and representation in the media from warm and cuddly and harmless and innocent shifted to darker and more insidious. It started off real chill and things just got progressively worse and worse and worse. Because Shoko would demonize being materialistic, he would also teach that simply existing, simply being in the world at this point in time automatically made you materialistic, since everybody else is so materialistic, right? And he said that simply existing, you would accrue bad karma, which of course, like I mentioned, you would have a worse rebirth and you would spend more time in hell. And he said that the only way that you could get rid of this bad karma was by doing one of two things. You have to cut off ties with the outside community completely, leave your job, leave your family, leave your friends, and come and stay within the confines of the cult. The thing is, even though Shoko would preach about how demonic and terrible and horrific being materialistic is, he would be charging $10,000 per month for his members who wanted to wear some type of headgear where their brain would somehow be connected to his brain and they would be linked in some way or another. Someone also paid over $8,000 to drink what he thought, or what they thought, was Shoko's blood. It was never confirmed or denied whether it was his blood or not. The person paid $8,000 to drink Shoko's blood, and Shoko took the money, of course. This guy's a con man. If we think back to his scams with his pharmacy, his scams with the drug, the miracle drug that he was making, and now this cult, it's a whole scam. It's a scam. It's a money-making scheme. And he's telling these people that being materialistic makes you accrue too much bad karma and you'd spend a lot of time in hell. Come on. His followers were completely cut off from the outside world. They did not have contact with their family, with their friends. They were not getting any news outside of whatever Shoko was presenting to them. So you can imagine that this information would be very skewed. They were also encouraged to experiment with illegal psychedelic drugs that would help them achieve a higher state of enlightenment. And like I also mentioned earlier, Shoko would preach about the end of the world, which he claimed was predicted by Nostradamus, which was supposed to end in 1999. Nostradamus also said that the savior would come from the East. Japan is in the East. Shoko is living in Japan. So Shoko is living in the East. So of course he would jump on this ideology. There's nothing more than you can use to control people than faith manipulation and a promise to survive the end of the world. Now, the second way that Shoko would preach to rid yourself of bad karma was the first being to remove yourself from the materialistic world. And the second would be to push your body to its physical limit. Members of the cult would be subjected to being locked in a box and buried underground with just enough oxygen to survive, and they would be left there all day. And in September of 1988, this would mark the commencement of Shoko absolutely losing his mind. So continuing on the second criteria of ridding yourself of bad karma, of pushing your body to its physical limit, Shoko forced one of his members to be tightly bound and hung upside down by his legs. Now, this was a centuries-old yoga practice, but the person engaging in this practice would only do so with years and years of training and preparation, and they would only do it for brief moments in time. The members in were expected to replicate this and do it for even longer periods of time over the course of just a few months. And unfortunately, this ritual would result in the cult's first death. The guy that was tightly bound and hung from his legs, while he was up there, he started to show signs of distress. He was like kind of thrashing about, and when the members asked Shoko, like, hey, what do we do? Shoko said to let him stay there because this is a test of him pushing his body to his physical limit, and it's important that he gets through it. But it didn't work. He was not able to push through it or overcome it because he succumbed to his injuries and the absolute stress that being tightly bound and hung upside down was putting on his body, and unfortunately passed. And this also happened during a very important moment for Shoko because at this time he was trying to get to receive their status as a new religion in the Tokyo metropolitan government. And obviously announcing that there was a death in the cult because of the crazy extreme acts that he was forcing these people to go through would not be a good idea, right? So what did he choose to do? Well, he chose to make it disappear. The body had to disappear. Any type of conversation surrounding it had to disappear. The members of the cult were expected to keep this information within the cult. And of course, they can't go anywhere and tell anybody else about it because they weren't allowed to leave and go out and do anything outside of whatever Shoko was allowing them to do. They ended up cremating the member's body and then they flushed away the evidence. And after this happened, one of the members of the guilt on his conscience was absolutely weighing him down. He said that he'd lost faith in the mission of he'd lost faith completely. And he went to Shoko and told him like, hey, I can't do this anymore. I'm out, I'm leaving, and I'm reporting you to the police. And things just got worse. And so after this member made his threats of leaving and reporting Shoko to the police, Shoko decided that in order to keep everything under wraps, that this person had to also disappear. He forced other members to strangle the member who threatened to blow the whistle, and they also cremated and flushed away his body. And this second death was not an accident. This second death marked the commencement of a series of cold-blooded murder that was about to take place in this cult. And if we also think about the structure of a family in Japanese culture, just getting up and leaving your family with no explanation, no trace, no rhyme or reason is not normal. It's not normal at all. So you can only imagine that, especially for the younger followers in this cult, their families were concerned. And specifically, when one family heard about the nonsensical and dangerous acts being expected of them in this cult, they decided that they wanted to get their lawyers involved. And this lawyer would uncover lies that Shoko was telling not only the members, but also the public, people outside of the cult. Now, Shoko had previously claimed that his DNA was sampled, experimented on, analyzed, and proven to have supernatural powers at some laboratory at Kyoto University. But this lawyer that had gotten involved would prove that this testing had never taken place. This university completely denied having anything to do with any type of testing and definitely did not tell Shoko this. And after this information got out, again, Shoko was so concerned about the doubt that this would place in his believers and his non-believers' mind, because he did not want to be publicly embarrassed like that. So on November 4th of 1989, Shoko sent four of his followers, to hunt down this lawyer whose name was Sakamoto, to hunt down Sakamoto and his family, who had uncovered and revealed this information. They broke into this man's apartment in the middle of the night, where he, his wife, and his 14-month-old son lived, and took them. They kidnapped them. So when Sakamoto did not show up for work the next day, his coworkers became concerned, and his coworkers would tell his family, his mom specifically, like, hey, Sakamoto did not come into work today. What's going on? Is he okay? And because his mom hadn't heard anything to, be concerned about, and she wasn't sure why he didn't show up to work, she ended up going over to his apartment. She had a key. They let themselves in to check out the situation, and the apartment was just left in a very strange state. The plates from dinner were still out. The baby's toys were still out. Everything was left in a state like people were just here sitting at this dinner table. This kid was just here playing with the things, and it just seems like they just upped and left like that. But we know that they didn't leave, they were taken. And unfortunately, Shoko would follow through with his unnecessary, cold-blooded murders, all for the sake of keeping up some type of reputation that he thought that he had with the public. Sakamoto and his wife were unfortunately poisoned and strangled, and the 14-month-old baby was also suffocated. Their bodies were leaving them difficult to identify, and they were separated and buried in different remote locations. Their bodies were not discovered until 6 years later. The frustrating thing is that even though the police knew that Sakamoto was threatened by in the past, they did not make the link. They did not make the connection of, this man and his entire family disappeared in the middle of the night without a trace. It was not a burglary. No, there was no theft. There was no damage to the home. There was nothing stolen. And that he has been threatened by in the past, but they didn't put two and two together. And I don't even really blame them, because at this point, The public did not know about the other murders that had occurred as a result of They did not know the type of things that the members were being subjected to behind the scenes. So at this point, the police really didn't think that they were dangerous. Shoko and his members were also responsible for the disappearance of Kiyoshi Korea, who was the brother of one of the members in He attempted to help his sister escape after he found out that Shoko was forcing her to give up her real estate assets. And of course, even though Shoko claimed that being materialistic was demonic and that's something that you're not supposed to care about, he still wanted the assets. It wasn't like he was telling her to just give it, just get rid of it, just forget it, just drop it and forget it. I don't care. He wanted it because he was materialistic and he cared about that type of stuff. Shoko and his members were also responsible for several other murders that would take place between 1994 and leading up to the craziest thing you could imagine that Shoko would even attempt, much less actually went through with twice. Over time, there were a lot of disappearances. There were a lot of the police and journalists were kind of connecting the dots. They were figuring out, okay, anytime this person tries to do anything with uncovering whatever or saying anything bad about they would end up missing or dead. They didn't outright say or even accuse of being responsible for any of this stuff, but there were signs that they knew because the journalists were terrified of covering any type of story in relation to or Shoko because they were afraid of mysteriously disappearing, and a lot of journalists would also receive death threats. Now, with the premise of this cult being based on Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and preaching enlightenment and ridding yourself of the materialistic world, all things that don't sound bad in your mind. And so you might be wondering, how in the world was Shoko taking his followers, right? His followers who joined this cult, thinking that it was going to be innocent, peaceful, a road to enlightenment and salvation and being saved and protected from the end of the world. How would you take these people and convince them to murder innocent families, innocent people, innocent babies? Well, Shoko was very good with his words, and he somehow convinced them that this was the merciful option. Since these people doubted him, it was proof enough to him that they were beyond being saved. They were beyond being enlightened enough to be saved from the end of the world. So if they killed them, they would be liberating their consciousness from their physical bodies, in turn ridding their bodies of any bad karma and saving them. So these followers were completely brainwashed into thinking that they were doing good, when in reality they were playing a major role in vindictive and cold-blooded murders. Now, as the years passed, Shoko decided that it was time for to increase its status in society. And he thought that the best way to do this would be to get them involved in politics. Shoko decided that he wanted to run for office under a new political party named Shin Murito, which means the Supreme Truth Party. Now, in preparation for the race and the results, Shoko and his followers were completely convinced that they were going to win. They focused on spreading positivity. They focused on promises of ridding Japan's society of materialism and vanity, and to save everyone by bringing them to a heightened state of enlightenment. He also promised free healthcare as well as a repeal of consumption tax. He raised millions of yen for an aggressive and bizarre campaign. which included marches and public dances with his followers dressed like Shoko. He even ordered his followers to vandalize and tear down posters, any type of campaign ad from any of his opposing candidates. And like I mentioned, Shoko and his followers, they were convinced that they were going to win. They thought that they had it in the bag, but in reality, they were being ridiculed left and right. No one was ever going to vote for them. No one ever took them seriously. And at the end, it was a massive failure. They only got 1,783 votes out of 50,000. And the loss, it was public, it was widespread, it was well covered. Shoko and was being ridiculed in the media. But, with all this, he didn't overreact or anything. He just started to plan a domestic terrorist attack with the use of a deadly chemical weapon. Nothing crazy. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. He started to plan a terrorist attack. Yes. With the use of a chemical weapon. Now, in order to convince his followers to go through with this, he told them that they were helping people in the same type of explanation that he gave for the previous murders. He was helping people who were beyond enlightenment. He claimed to his followers that the election was rigged, and it proved how far gone the world was from saving. The fact that they didn't understand and were not able to see how important his message was, how important he is, and with the end of the world approaching in 1999, they needed to save everyone by killing everyone so that they can be reborn. And the craziest thing about all of this is that there were really intelligent people who were members of this cult. I'm talking high status in society, highly intelligent, Ivy League type education. And it really goes to show how strong the power of persuasion can be, especially when you tie in faith manipulation and you're playing on people's vulnerability, and you're dangling this promise of survival, of the end of the world. You're playing on people's fear of death. It can just completely negate everything. Forget everything you know about anything, because these people are highly intelligent. But when you play on a person's fear and when you play with a person's faith, everything else is out the window. On June 27th of 1994, this would mark the first major unfortunate event of today's case. Now, of course, the previous murders and disappearances are major, but this took it to another level. On June 27th of 1994, this day would mark Ahm's first attack on the public with the use of a deadly chemical. And this chemical that they used was named sarin. Sarin is a human-made warfare nerve agent, and it is considered the most toxic out of all nerve agents. On the evening of June 27th, some of his followers pulled up into a neighborhood that was believed to be inhabited by 3 judges. Now, these 3 judges were targeted specifically because they sat on a panel hearing for a lawsuit in regard to some real estate regarding Shoko. And Shoko got word that these judges were not about to vote in his favor. So then what did he do? He instructed his followers to pull up into the neighborhood with a van, a refrigerated van that had a computer-controlled release system for the nerve agent, the sarin, and it would release a cloud of sarin into the air in this neighborhood. On this unfortunate night, the followers would go through with their orders. They would release the sarin into the air. It would disperse into any cracks in windowsills, in windows that were just open, in doors that were just left open. And this attack would take the lives of 7 people while sending 200 to the hospital. The following year, in 1995, this is when would would go through with their second deadly attack with the use of sarin. At 5 different locations in Tokyo subway system, there were 5 different members from and they were instructed to take these sacks that were filled with sarin and some mix of other chemicals, with the main thing being sarin, and it was wrapped in a newspaper. They would put it on the ground, and they were instructed to, at a certain time, puncture those bags with the umbrella and get the hell out. And the sarin would spill out, and eventually it would evaporate into the air, and then many people would start experiencing symptoms of being poisoned by a nerve gas, which would include coughing, convulsion, loss of consciousness, and respiratory failure, which would ultimately lead to death. This attack resulted in anywhere between 12 and 14 deaths. I saw different numbers on different sources, but it was between 12 and 14, with 5,500 being injured in some way and 1,000 of those being hospitalized. So this was a big attack, like a huge attack. And this is something that completely shocked and continued to haunt the people of Tokyo. The sarin was made by members in the cult, and other scientists who were talking about the attack said that apparently the cult was not very good at making the nerve agent, and that's why they made a liquid version of it, I guess, because in its pure form, sarin is a gas. And if they had made something that would disperse just the gas, like pure sarin, into the subway station, this would have resulted in the death toll climbing up into the thousands. Now, of course, 12 to 14 people losing their lives is already a tremendous amount. It's too many. One, that's already too much. But oh my God, if they had released the gas version of sarin into the subway stations, it could have been 1,000,000 times worse. And within days of this attack, the Japanese government had enough. At this point, they did not care about no death threats. They did not care about anything that Shoko or any other member in could threaten to do, because they're already showing their ass. They're already showing that they could do terrible things. And at this point, they were like, this is it. We are done. We are taking this man out. So in the end, Shoko was arrested along with a couple dozen other members in Shoko's trial lasted almost 8 years. And during his trial, Shoko was completely incoherent. He would be mumbling gibberish. Sometimes he would just have severe bizarre outbursts where at some points he was speaking gibberish, at other points he was speaking broken English. And his lawyers would say that they were never, ever able to have a coherent conversation with Shoko, like at all, over the 8 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist found that Shoko could be faking some type of mental illness, and they said that he was fit to stand trial. In 2005, Shoko was convicted for being the mastermind behind the sarin attacks, and he was ultimately sentenced to death by hanging. He served 22 years in prison before his execution in July of 2018. About 12 of ALM's members were also convicted and sentenced to death, but most of their cases have been appealed and are currently pending. And I really want to end this video by circling back and focusing on what's really important. It's the victims of this unfortunate attack, the people who survived, the people who didn't, and how it completely shook the society. Because just imagine that. Imagine being there in that time and place, being alive during that time, knowing that at some point you're going to need to commute through the subway stations to get to work or to get to family or to get wherever. And now you have this permanent fear of what if, Shoko did terrible things, not only with the people he ordered to be murdered and the attacks with the sarin, but also the victims in his cult, the members, the things that he would subject them to, it's absolutely disgusting. And nobody should have had to endure anything like that from the repulsive behavior of this man. And with that, that is all I have for today's video. Thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. As always, please take care, be kind to yourself and others, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.